Tensions flare immediately as Earth's isolated outpost faces a brutal, unexpected strike. Watching from the command center, a mixture of alien arrogance and human calm collide. The world is forced to reckon with an ancient secret buried beneath humanity's surface, a power that no one dared expect. Earth was never invited to the council. The words sliced through the silence of the command room, spoken by none other than Ilara Voss, commander of Sentinel-7. She didn't need to say them aloud. The bitterness had been there, simmering, long before the Zithari fleet arrived. They had made their disdain for humanity clear from the moment the first diplomatic envoy had arrived and been turned away. Now, their strike on Earth's far-flung outpost was all the answer they needed. The holographic map flickered again, its once pristine image now filled with black voids where Earth's once proud outposts had stood. The remains of Sentinel-7 floated, a cluster of broken debris, slowly losing its grip on the pull of Earth's gravity. Outside the viewport, the endless blackness of space seemed to stretch and swallow the stars. But it was not the blackness that caught Ilara's attention. It was the massive fleet of warships, their cold silhouettes circling the orbit above Earth like vultures. A total of 700,000 ships, each a harbinger of destruction. No communication, no warning. The Zithari had attacked the moment they saw Earth's vulnerability, and now the full force of their fleet was in orbit. They were testing humanity. Theirs was the arrogance of beings who had transcended the need for diplomacy, or so they thought. "What are we looking at, Commander?" Major Kale's voice broke through her thoughts, bringing her attention back to the present. The tension in the air was palpable, even though none of them were showing fear. Fear wasn't a luxury humans could afford anymore. The Zithari think we are weak, they think we are primitive, but they don't understand us. "Not yet," Ilara responded, her voice controlled, but the fire behind her eyes was unmistakable. "Shall we retaliate?" asked Captain Rykor, his voice low, laced with the weight of years spent in conflict. "Retaliation without preparation would be foolish," Ilara said, her fingers still hovering over the console. She was not one for rash decisions. The attack had left the outpost crippled, but they still had a chance to strike back. Humanity had power, power hidden beneath the surface. It had always been there, waiting. On the table, a blinking light from the encrypted communication system caught her eye. It was an incoming message, the same garbled file they had received earlier, just before the attack. A final transmission from Sentinel-7's lead scientist, Dr. Celine Varkas. It was incomplete, half-finished, almost like a desperate last cry. "For help, we'll decrypt it," Ilara ordered, and the room fell silent as the encrypted message began to crack open, pixel by pixel. The tension grew, a thick cloud suffocating the room. Everyone knew there was something important here, something humanity needed to know. The first line of the message appeared, but it was incomplete. The weapon buried below. The last. "Warning, the Zithari don't understand." The message cut off abruptly, leaving only the chilling silence that followed. Ilara felt her stomach twist, her mind racing. "What weapon?" she muttered, barely audible. The symbols flashed across the screen, coordinates, numerical patterns, and encrypted phrases too complex for anyone but Dr. Varkas to understand. A heavy pause lingered in the room before Major Kale spoke. "That weapon, do you think it's real, Commander?" Ilara didn't answer immediately. She knew the weapon the scientist referred to. Humanity's last-ditch contingency plan, buried deep beneath Earth's surface. It had been dormant for centuries, untouched since the earliest days of human civilization. The weapon was more than a mere defense mechanism. It was something the galaxy had forgotten, something so powerful that no one, not even humanity, truly understood its full scope. "It's real," she said finally, her voice unwavering, but the weight of her words hit harder than any blast from the alien ships in orbit. The countdown to retaliation had begun, but something felt off. The Zythari had made their move, but they didn't know what they had woken. The weapon had been buried for a reason. It was never meant to see the light of day again. Ilara turned toward Rykor. "We need to be sure we're ready. We don't fire unless we have all the intel we need." A soft beeping interrupted the moment. Another encrypted message. This time, the source was clear. It came from a rebel faction on Earth's surface, isolated and operating beyond the reach of the current government. They had intercepted a communication from the Zythari fleet. The message, intercepted in real time, was as cold as it was terrifying. "Earth's inhabitants are not worthy of space. We will rid the galaxy of this failed experiment. We need to show them that we are not weak," Ilara muttered under her breath. "Humanity's greatest mistake was believing we were insignificant." The symbol on the screen began to pulse. "Coordinates again. The location of the buried weapon. It's time," the coordinates seemed to say. Captain Rykor stepped forward, his gaze firm. "We strike first. We have the weapons, the means, the will. But do we have the strength to follow through?" Ilara turned to him, her eyes dark and resolute. "They think we're alone. They never looked underground." Outside, the Zythari warships loomed large, but beneath Earth's crust, an ancient and terrifying force was ready to awaken. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force that would reshape the course of the galaxy forever. The countdown to retaliation continued, but Ilara's mind was already set. The attack wasn't the beginning. It was the spark that would ignite humanity's fire. The Zythari would learn that humans had buried more than they could imagine. Humanity's quiet response is a facade, and the truth about the buried weapon begins to unfold. Ilara and her team uncover chilling details about the Zythari's true intentions, while tensions rise as Earth's defenses are slowly mobilized. Secrets long kept hidden now threaten to erupt into galactic war. The bridge of Sentinel-7 hummed with quiet activity. The crew moved with purpose, but every glance cast toward the massive screen, showing the Zythari warships hovering in orbit, was filled with the weight of impending doom. Their silent presence was unsettling, too quiet, as if they were waiting for something or someone. Ilara Voss stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Her sharp gaze never left the screen, but her mind was far from the current situation. The encrypted messages, the weapon below, and the growing sense of unease gnawed at her thoughts. "Commander," Kyle's voice broke through the silence. "We've decrypted the full message from Dr. Varkas." Ilara turned, her brow furrowing. She had been expecting this, but hearing it aloud felt different. The implications of the scientist's final words were far from comforting. "What did she say?" Ilara asked, her voice low and measured. Kyle's voice was heavy with the gravity of the situation. "The weapon's location is not just a random site, Commander. It's something much older, much more dangerous. It was buried by a precursor civilization, one that existed long before humanity, long before the Zythari ever set foot in the galaxy." Ilara's mind raced. The knowledge of an ancient buried weapon was bad enough, but to hear it was linked to a long-lost civilization, one unknown even to the Zythari, was something else entirely. The Zythari had always believed themselves to be the pinnacle of galactic development. They were the ones who decided which species were worthy of ascension. For them to face an enemy from a civilization they had never encountered was a wild card they could not have anticipated. "What do we know about this civilization?" Ilara asked, moving toward the console where Kyle had been working. "We're still piecing it together," Kyle replied, turning to face her. "But from what we can gather, they were an advanced race, far beyond the Zythari even. The weapons they left behind, whatever they are, were designed not just for destruction, but for control, control over minds, over will, over the very fabric of reality itself. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She had heard whispers of such weapons, but the stories had always seemed like folklore, legends told by the most paranoid minds. But now, it seemed those myths were grounded in reality. The weapon. How does it work? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale paused. That's the part we don't fully understand yet. But there's something else, Dr. Varkas's final notes. They mentioned something about a trigger, a signal that would activate the weapon, but only if certain conditions were met. Ilara's mind flashed back to the Zethari fleet in orbit. Had they triggered it unknowingly? The possibility hung in the air like a thick fog. Before she could speak, the door to the command center opened with a soft hiss. Captain Rykor entered, his expression grim. He glanced at the screen showing the Zethari fleet, his jaw clenched tight. "We've received another transmission from the surface," Rykor said, his voice stern. "It's from the rebel faction in North Africa. They've been monitoring the Zethari fleet and intercepted communications that are disturbing." Ilara motioned for him to continue. "What did they hear?" "The Zethari aren't just here for Earth. They're here for something on Earth. They believe we have something buried beneath the surface. They think the weapon is a key to something much larger." "Larger?" Ilara asked, her pulse quickening. "They believe the weapon will unlock a power source, a resource that can't be replicated, the kind of resource that could make them invincible." Rykor's voice dropped to a low murmur. "It seems the weapon is not just a tool of war. It's a key, and they think it's buried here." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The Zethari hadn't just attacked Outpost Sentinel-7 for its strategic location. They were hunting for something. The weapon was only part of the puzzle, a clue to an even greater secret. "We need to get ahead of this," Ilara said, straightening her back. "Activate the defense grid. Contact every remaining human base on the surface. We're mobilizing, but we need answers." "We'll do what we can," Rykor replied, already moving to relay orders to the rest of the fleet. Ilara turned back to the console, her mind racing. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. The weapon buried beneath Earth's surface was no accident. It had been left there for a reason, but who had left it, and why? "Commander," Kyle's voice again broke through her thoughts. "There's more." Ilara turned back to him, her expression a mixture of impatience and curiosity. "What now? We've been looking through old records. There's a name that keeps appearing in connection with the ancient weapon, a name we thought was just myth." "Who?" Ilara demanded. "Vorex," Kyle said, his voice heavy with significance. "A name whispered by the most secretive of human societies, the ones who kept the knowledge of this weapon hidden, even from their own government. Vorex was the leader of the ancient race that built the weapon." "And the Zethari?" Ilara pressed. "They knew about him, and they were afraid of him." The realization hit Ilara like a lightning bolt. The weapon wasn't just a relic of a dead civilization. It was a tool of unimaginable power, and the Zethari were not prepared for what it could do. "We need to act fast," she said, her voice now hard with determination. "Get the fleet into position. We don't wait for them to make the first move." Outside, the warships in orbit began to stir. But Earth had one final ace to play, a weapon that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. If they could unlock its secrets, humanity would not just survive this invasion, they would dominate it. Ilara and her team prepared to unearth the buried weapon beneath Earth's surface. Secrets of the ancient weapon emerge, leading to an unexpected revelation. The Zethari are closer to achieving their objective than humanity realized, and Ilara must act swiftly before the balance of power shifts entirely in their favor. The Hum of machinery reverberated through the halls of Sentinel-7 as the crew scrambled to mobilize. Time was no longer a luxury they could afford. The Zithari fleet lingered above them, and Earth's fragile defenses were being stretched thinner by the second. But it wasn't the warships that kept Ilara awake at night. It was the weapon, buried beneath the surface, slowly coming to life. The coordinates from Dr. Varkas's final transmission had been clear. Too clear. She stood in the central command room, her eyes tracing the holographic map that now displayed the underground caverns leading to the weapon. The ancient machine was more than just a weapon. It was a trap, a well-laid secret designed to keep humanity in the dark. Kale stood beside her, his face tense. The excavation teams are ready, Commander, but there's something off about the readings we're getting from the surface. It's as if the weapon, it's already aware that we're coming. Ilara's gaze hardened. Aware? I know it sounds crazy, but the sensors are picking up heat signatures, disturbances, almost like it's reacting to us, or to them, Kyle said, gesturing toward the warships in orbit. Ilara clenched her fists. The thought of the Zithari being aware of the weapon's location before humanity had even set foot on the excavation site was unsettling. Start the excavation immediately. We need to get to it before they do. A low, vibrating hum filled the room as the orders were relayed to the excavation team below. Ilara felt the weight of her decision like a boulder on her chest. Uncovering the weapon would reveal everything humanity had been hiding, everything the Zithari had feared. As the crew prepared for the underground excavation, Ilara turned to Rykor, who had entered the command room with a grim expression. "What's the status on the surface?" she asked. "The rebel faction in North Africa is ready to assist. They've secured the outer perimeter of the excavation site. But, Commander..." Rykor hesitated. "We're getting reports from the surface that the Zithari aren't just waiting above. They're moving closer. Something tells me they know exactly where we're digging." Ilara's heart raced. How did they know? The more she thought about it, the more it seemed that the Zithari weren't just after the weapon. They were after control of whatever power lay beneath Earth's crust. This wasn't about domination. This was about total, unchallenged supremacy. "Send every available unit to the surface," Ilara ordered. "We need to get to the weapon before they do, or Earth is lost. No more waiting." With a nod, Rykor left the room, his steps echoing in the now silent hallway. Ilara's eyes returned to the holographic map. The weapon's location flickered, in and out, the result of countless shifts in the underground caverns. The longer they delayed, the more difficult it would be to reach it. A new report came through. The excavation team had reached the first layer of the ancient structure. The walls, cracked and weathered, began to reveal their true nature. They weren't just carvings. They were symbols, an ancient language so complex and intricate that even the most advanced human translators couldn't fully decode it. Ilara's pulse quickened as the images appeared before her. The symbols were beautiful, almost hypnotic, and yet there was an underlying sense of danger in their design. This was no ordinary civilization. They had left behind more than just technology. They had left behind a warning. "Commander, we have a problem." Kyle's voice broke through, the tension dragging Ilara back to the present. "What is it?" she asked, her tone sharp. "We've detected a strange energy signature just beneath the surface. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. It's almost as if it's alive." Ilara's stomach dropped. Alive? A weapon? Alive? "Bring up the readings," she ordered, and immediately the console flashed with data. A sickly green glow pulsated beneath the surface of the Earth, stretching for miles. It wasn't just a source of power, it was conscious. "This can't be right," Kale muttered, staring at the screen in disbelief. "The energy readings are intensifying. If this thing awakens fully, it could cause a cataclysm." Ilara's mind raced. If the weapon was alive, then there was more to this than they could have ever imagined. It wasn't just buried to protect humanity, it was buried to keep humanity from awakening it. The question was, what would happen if the Scythari reached? At first, suddenly the room went dark. The lights flickered as a surge of energy coursed through the station. A violent tremor shook the floor, and Ilara's breath caught in her chest. The weapon was responding. It was waking up. "We need to—" "Stop this!" Ilara said, her voice fierce with resolve. "Now, prepare the extraction teams to dig faster. We don't have time for caution." Another tremor rocked the base, and this time it wasn't from the excavation. The ground below them began to shift, almost as if the weapon itself was fighting against the very act of being uncovered. Ilara glanced up at the monitor, showing the Zithari fleet above Earth. The warships remained stationary, watching, waiting, the calm before the storm. A new report came in from the rebel faction. "The Zithari are preparing for something. They've begun an unusual transmission." "What are they saying?" Ilara demanded. "They're saying it's too late, that the weapon has already chosen its side." A chill ran down Ilara's spine. The weapon hadn't just been a tool of destruction, it had been a test. And now it was choosing its master. "We need to move," Ilara ordered, turning toward the exit. "Get the fleet into position. We're about to face a new kind of war." The weapon begins to exert its influence, and the Zithari make their move. Ilara faces a moral dilemma. As she realizes the power of the weapon goes far beyond anything humanity anticipated, the stakes grow higher as factions within Earth's forces begin to fracture. The countdown to war intensifies. The ground shook violently beneath Ilara's feet as the lights flickered once more, casting eerie shadows across the command room. The low hum of machinery was now drowned out by the deep rumbling of the Earth itself, reverberating up from the depths where the weapon was hidden. Ilara's gaze was fixed on the holographic map, the fissures in the ground widening on the screen, creating jagged lines, as though the planet itself was splitting apart. "What the hell is happening down there?" Kyle's voice trembled with a mix of confusion and fear. His usual composure was gone, replaced by raw unease. "The weapon," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's waking up, and we've just unlocked the first layer of its power." She turned to face the screen again, where the sensor readings were fluctuating wildly. The energy signature from below the surface had grown exponentially, the once muted glow now blinding in its intensity. The device was more than a weapon. It was a conduit, a gate to something far larger and far more dangerous than anything Earth had encountered before. "We have to stop this," Kyle insisted, his voice sharp. "The energy levels are rising, faster than we can control. If we don't neutralize it soon, it could tear this planet apart." Ilara nodded but didn't speak. In her gut, she knew Kale was right. But what choice did they have? They had already awakened it. There was no going back now. "Commander, we have a new report from the surface." Rykor's voice cut through her thoughts. His expression was grave. "The Zithari are mobilizing." Ilara turned swiftly, meeting his eyes with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "They've begun their attack?" "No," Rykor replied. "They're waiting. They know we've activated the weapon. They're preparing for something." Ilara's mind raced. The Zithari had always been quick to strike, but now they were standing by, watching, calculating. Something was off. A communication pinged on the screen, an incoming transmission from the Zithari fleet. It was short and direct, the words cold and calculated. "You have awakened the gate. You cannot control what you have unleashed. The weapon will choose its master, and it will not be you." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The message was clear, and yet the deeper meaning echoed louder. The weapon, the ancient gate, had already been chosen. Choose them, chosen humanity. "We need to act fast," Ilara said, her voice steady but her mind racing. "If the Ixithari think they can control it, they're making a grave mistake. They don't know what we've awoken." She turned to the operations table. Her fingers hovered over the tactical display, tracing the lines of battle already, unfolding. The fleet was in motion, but Ilara knew that every second counted now. They couldn't afford hesitation. "We're going to need more than just the fleet," Ilara muttered under her breath. She couldn't ignore the unsettling truth any longer. The weapon wasn't merely a tool for war. It was something far more complex, far more alive. Kyle walked up beside her, his expression dark. "Commander, the excavation teams are reporting resistance. The deeper we go, the stronger the weapon's influence becomes. It's as if it's fighting us." "Fighting us?" Ilara's voice rose in disbelief. "How can a machine fight back? The weapon isn't just mechanical," Kyle said, his voice low. "It's sentient. Whatever civilization left it behind, they knew what they were doing. This weapon, it's a form of control. It's a power to bend minds, not just destroy." A cold silence fell over the room as Ilara absorbed his words. The weapon wasn't just an ancient relic. It was something far more insidious, a device designed not for annihilation, but for domination. It could control not only the battlefield, but the very will of those who wielded it. "The Zithari think they can control it," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the tension. "But they're wrong. We need to take command of it before." "And they do. If we don't, it'll tear us all apart." She turned toward Rykor, her eyes hard with determination. "Prepare the fleet for a full-scale assault on the Zithari ships. We'll hold them off long enough for the excavation team to reach the weapon." Rykor nodded without hesitation. "Understood, Commander. But there's something else." Ilara's eyes narrowed. "What?" "The rebel factions on the surface. They're not all on our side. Some of them want to use the weapon for their own purposes." The words hit Ilara like a punch to the gut. She had known the rebels were fractured, but the thought that some of them might betray humanity's cause at this critical juncture was a terrifying prospect. "Who?" she demanded. "I don't know yet," Rykor said, his expression grim. "But we can't afford to trust anyone until we know where their true loyalties lie. If the weapon can influence minds, who's to say it hasn't already turned some of our own against us?" Ilara clenched her fists. "Then we'll make sure they don't have the chance. Keep the surface secure. No one leaves until we have control." She turned back to the map, her thoughts racing. The Zithari were maneuvering in the skies above, but it was the forces on the ground that worried her the most. If they couldn't gain control of the weapon, and fast, they might as well surrender to the Zithari now. As the tension on the surface continued to escalate, Ilara felt the burden of command settle heavily on her shoulders. The future of Earth and perhaps the galaxy itself rested on her decision. She could no longer afford to think of the weapon as just a tool. It was a living, breathing entity, an ancient power that could reshape everything. "We need to wake it up fully," she said, her voice resolute. "Whatever it is, we need to harness it. The Zithari won't hesitate to destroy us if we give them the chance." The countdown to war had begun, but this time there would be no turning back. As the weapon's influence grows stronger, Ilara faces a difficult choice: awaken its full potential and risk losing control, or find a way to neutralize it before it devastates everything. The Zithari make their final move, and Earth's forces are split. Humanity's greatest weapon may also be its greatest curse. The excavation continued, but the deeper they delved into the ancient underground structure, the more Ilara could feel the weapon's presence. It wasn't just in the readings, the energy surges, or the sensors flashing warnings of impending instability. No, it was in the air itself, a palpable weight, as if something ancient and powerful was waking, stretching its limbs and reaching for dominion. Ilara stood before the screen, showing the latest sensor data. The fluctuating energy signature was stronger than ever, and the glow that had once been faint pulses of light now seemed to permeate the entire cavern beneath the surface. They weren't just uncovering a weapon, they were digging into the heart of something far more dangerous, something that might consume them all. "The deeper we go, the stronger its pull," Kyle said, his voice tight with tension. He had been working with the excavation team, trying to get to the core of the weapon before it could exert too much influence on the surrounding area. "I don't like this, Commander. This thing, it's more than we bargained for. It's changing everything." Ilara could feel the truth of his words. The air felt charged, as though an invisible force was trying to manipulate their every move. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a sentient force, and it was growing more awake with every passing moment. "We can't stop now," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the storm of anxiety building within her. "The Xithari are on their way, and they already know what we're doing. We have to take control of the weapon first, before they do." She turned to Rykor, who was watching the data feed with a grim expression. "Any updates from the surface?" "They're preparing for a full-scale assault," Rykor said, his voice low. "The Xithari are making their move. We've intercepted communications. They know we're trying to unlock the weapon's full potential, and they're not going to let us have it." Ilara's stomach churned. If the Xithari knew about the weapon, then it was already too late. They would never let humanity control it, not after seeing the potential it held. "Get the fleet in position," she ordered, her voice a command that left no room for argument. "We'll have to hold them off long enough for the excavation team to finish their work." Rykor nodded and left to relay the orders, but Ilara's thoughts remained heavy. There was something more to the Xithari's intentions, something darker. They hadn't just come to Earth for the weapon, they had come for its power. A harsh beep from the console broke her reverie. It was an incoming transmission from the rebel faction on the surface. Ilara tapped the screen, and the communication came through clear, though the voice on the other end sounded strained, desperate. "Commander Voss, we have a problem," the voice said. It was one of the rebel leaders, her tone filled with urgency. "Some of our own people are being influenced by the weapon. We've lost control of several key positions. They're not acting like themselves. It's as if they've been turned." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She had feared this. The weapon's sentience wasn't just an abstract concept. It was already reaching out, bending minds, and altering wills. "What do you mean, turned?" Ilara asked, her voice sharp. "They're not fighting for us anymore. They're fighting for something else," the rebel leader replied, her voice trembling with fear. "We think it's a weapon. It's corrupting their minds." Ilara clenched her jaw. This was worse than she could have ever imagined. The weapon was already affecting the very people they needed to defend Earth. If it could control minds like this, then what was it capable of when fully awakened? "We need to secure all positions," Ilara ordered, her mind spinning with the consequences of this new revelation. "Any of our own who are compromised, contain them. If they're being influenced, we can't afford to let them continue." As she spoke, her thoughts drifted to the larger question. What would happen once the weapon was fully awakened? It had already begun to manipulate human minds, and if the Xithari gained control of it, they would have an unstoppable force at their disposal. But could humanity control it? Was it even worth the risk? "Ilara," Kyle's voice was a warning, pulling her back to the present. "The weapon, it's not just about control. It's about choice. It's giving them a vision, a way of seeing things. They're not just compromised, they're being shown a path." "What path?" Ilara asked, her voice low, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "It's showing them a future, one where they're in control, where they wield this power. Some of them, they're beginning to see the weapon's potential, and they're aligning with it." Ilara's stomach dropped. This was more than she had feared. The weapon wasn't just a tool for destruction, it was a force of seduction. It was offering humanity power beyond anything they had ever known, and there were those who would be all too eager to take that power. "Rykor, get to the surface," Ilara ordered. "Stop the excavation if you have to. We need to secure the weapon before it has any more influence. We need to make a choice. Do we control it, or do we destroy it?" As Rykor left, Ilara turned back to the map. The Zythari fleet was already moving into position. There was no more time for second guesses. They had to act, and they had to act now. But as she looked at the weapon's energy readings growing stronger by the second, a cold realization hit her. The weapon wasn't just a means to an end. It was a force that could reshape everything, and if humanity wasn't careful, it would reshape them in ways they couldn't begin to understand. Ilara confronts the darker side of the weapon's power. As the situation spirals out of control, as internal factions within Earth's forces fracture, the full extent of the weapon's influence begins to emerge. A decision must be made. Destroy the weapon before it's too late, or risk the future of humanity and the galaxy. The deep tremor shook the station once again, but this time, Ilara didn't flinch. She had grown used to the earth-shaking reverberations, as the weapon below them pulsed with increasing intensity. But what shook her to her core was the realization that they had crossed a line, a point of no return. Every passing second only brought them closer to a catastrophe beyond imagining. "Commander," Kyle's voice broke through the darkness of her thoughts. "The energy readings are off the charts. We're reaching critical levels." She didn't need him to explain further. She could feel it, the subtle shift in the air as the weapon's influence spread. There was no turning back now. The more they excavated, the stronger the weapon's call became. It wasn't just a machine, it was a sentient force, and it had set its sights on the human race. "We can't stop now," Ilara replied, her voice unwavering despite the fear, gnawing at her. "The Ixithari are mobilizing. They'll be here any moment. We have to finish this." But Kyle shook his head, his face drawn with concern. "You don't understand, Ilara. The deeper we go, the more it changes them." He gestured toward the rebel faction's transmission, which had just come in. It was a disturbing video feed, showing the faces of several rebel leaders, men and women who had once been staunch supporters of humanity's survival. Now, their expressions were vacant, their eyes glazed over as they muttered in a strange, alien language. "They're not just compromised anymore," Kyle continued. "They're possessed. This isn't just mind control. The weapon is influencing them, turning them into something else." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. She had feared this. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was a parasite, one that fed on the minds of those around it. The more they dug into the caverns, the more the weapon spread its influence. "We need to make a decision," Ilara said, her voice steely. "Do we destroy it now, or risk it becoming the thing that controls us all?" The room fell silent. Everyone knew the stakes now. The weapon had never been just a tool for war. It was something much darker, something that would bend the will of those who sought to control it. If the Zythari were to take control, they would become unstoppable. But if humanity couldn't control it either, they risked becoming nothing more than pawns in the weapons game. Suddenly, an alarm blared across the station. The comms panel flashed, and Rykor's urgent voice cut through the chaos. "Commander, we've detected a breach. The Zythari are launching an assault on the surface." Ilara didn't need to hear more. She turned to Kale. "Activate the defensive systems. Mobilize every unit we have." A loud crash echoed from the walls of Sentinel-7, and the lights flickered once more, this time plunging the room into semi-darkness. The hum of machinery was replaced by the distant rumble of explosions from below, signaling that the surface was under attack. "They've found us," Kale muttered. "We're running out of time." Elara's mind raced. They had to hold off the Zithari while still trying to control the weapon. But how could they when it was already beginning to warp the minds of their own people? The rebel faction was already splintering, with more and more defecting to the weapon's call. And the Zithari, they were relentless in their pursuit of it. If the weapon fell into their hands, the war would be over before it even began. A moment of clarity hit. Her! Ricor, can you confirm the status of the weapon's core? She asked, her voice sharper than ever. We're almost there, Ricor replied, sounding strained. But there's something strange. The closer we get, the more violent the resistance. It's like the weapon is fighting back. Fighting back? Elara echoed. It's not a machine, Ricor. It's alive, and if it's trying to stop us, then we need to rethink everything. She turned back to Kale. If we can't control it, then we need to destroy it. Now. Kale's eyes darkened. Do we have the capability to destroy it before it fully activates? Elara hesitated. We do. But it's a last resort. If we destroy the weapon without fully understanding it, we risk destabilizing the entire system. It could collapse the planet. Hell, it could trigger a chain reaction that rips apart the galaxy. But the stakes had shifted. With the Zithari closing in, there was no choice but to act. Activate the fail-safe, Elara said, her voice resolute. We're taking the weapon offline, now. As she gave the order, a sense of finality settled over her. She had made the choice. No matter the cost, the weapon had to be neutralized. Humanity had to remain in control of its future, or it would cease to have one. We're ready, Kyle said, glancing at the monitors. We've initiated the deactivation sequence. But, Commander, there's something strange. The weapon, it's resisting. The room trembled again, this time more violently. A sudden burst of energy flared up from the core, sending shockwaves through the station. The lights flickered and then went dark. What the hell is happening? Kyle demanded. The answer came too late. A booming voice echoed through the command room, a voice that was not human. It was deep, reverberating through the very walls. You cannot control me. I have chosen. The words were chilling, but they weren't directed at them. They were directed at the Zithari. The weapon had made its choice. It had sided with humanity, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the weapon was no longer just a dormant power. It was alive, and it had developed a will of its own. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as the lights flickered back on, revealing an array of newly revealed markings on the station's walls. Ancient symbols had begun to glow, lighting up like a map of stars, and then the floor beneath her feet cracked open, sending a surge of energy into the air, sparking a chaotic feedback loop that echoed across the station. The weapon had awakened. And with it, the fate of Earth had been sealed. The weapon's true power is unleashed, and its influence spreads beyond what anyone could have anticipated. As Elara's forces fight a losing battle against both the Zithari and the weapon itself, she faces a moral and existential crisis. With Earth's survival hanging in the balance, the question becomes clear. Can humanity overcome its own creation, or will it fall to the power it awakened? The floor shook violently once again, but this time it wasn't a tremor from the excavation. It was the weapon itself, its power surging as though it had been woken from a deep slumber. The walls of Sentinel-7 seemed to pulse with energy, the ancient symbols glowing brighter with each passing moment, a silent testament to the power they had unleashed. Elara stood frozen, staring at the holographic map before her. The weapon's energy readings were off the charts. Every sensor was flashing red, indicating that the core was reaching critical mass. The gate had opened. But what was more terrifying than the readings themselves was the fact that the weapon wasn't just a passive tool. It was an entity, a living force that had made its decision. And it had sided with humanity. Or at least that's what they thought. "We've lost control, Commander." Kyle's voice broke through the haze of Ilara's thoughts. "The weapon, it's not just responding to the excavation, it's starting to spread." Ilara's eyes locked onto the transmission that had just come through. The rebel factions who had been in the front lines were now reporting strange behavior. Leaders once loyal to humanity's cause were now changed. They no longer spoke in human voices. Their words were alien, tinged with a resonance that seemed to echo from the depths of space itself. The screen flickered, revealing the face of one of the rebel leaders, but something was wrong. His eyes were wide and empty, glazed over as though he were no longer truly there. "Commander, the weapon. It's calling to us," the rebel leader whispered, his voice strained and unnatural. You can't stop it." Ilara's heart sank. She had feared this. The weapon's influence was no longer contained. It had already begun to corrupt minds, bending them to its will. It was as though the weapon was calling to everyone who came close, offering them a vision of unimaginable power, and in exchange, demanding their loyalty. "Commander," Rykor's voice snapped. "Ilara, back to the present. We've received a communication from the Zithari fleet. They're preparing for the final assault." Ilara's mind raced. The Zithari were relentless, and their fleet was vast. They knew the weapon was now fully active, and they would not allow humanity to wield it. The war was no longer about territorial control. It was about total annihilation. "We can't let them have it," Ilara said, her voice colder than steel. "Prepare for full defense. We'll hold them off long enough for the excavation teams to finish their work." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. The weapon wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a living force, one that had its own agenda, and that agenda was beginning to unfold before her eyes. "Commander, the weapon has shifted," Kyle said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just sending out pulses of energy, it's warping reality itself." Ilara's eyes widened in horror as the map displayed anomalies in the surrounding areas. Gravity was fluctuating in odd patterns. Light flickered and bent, as if time itself was being distorted by the weapon's influence. "We can't fight this," Kyle said, his voice breaking with the weight of the realization. "It's beyond anything we've ever faced." "Then what do we do?" Ilara demanded, her voice sharp with the pressure of the moment. The weight of command had never felt heavier. She was responsible for every life on Sentinel-7, every person on Earth. She had no choice but to find a way to stop this before it was too late. Kyle paused before answering. "We either embrace it or we destroy it. There's no middle ground." Ilara's heart sank. Embrace it? The weapon was no longer a tool. It had become a god, a force of nature that no human could control. But to destroy it was to risk everything. If they triggered the failsafe, they would lose everything, including Earth itself. "Commander," Rykor's voice cut through the chaos. "We've just intercepted a transmission from the Zithari fleet. They've begun deploying ground forces to the excavation site. They're coming for the weapon." Ilara's blood ran cold. The Zithari had finally made their move, and this time they weren't waiting for humanity to finish what they had started. They were coming for the weapon, and nothing would stop them. "Get the fleet into position," Ilara said, her voice cold with determination. "We'll fight them off, but we need to hold them long enough for the weapon's core to stabilize." Kale looked at her, his eyes full of doubt. "But Commander, if the core isn't stabilized, the weapon could wipe them out, and us along with it. We don't know what it will do once it's fully awakened." Ilara met his gaze, her expression hardening. "Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't come to that. We need to take control of the weapon before it takes control of us." The sound of approaching gunfire echoed from the surface. The Zithari were closing in. Ilara could feel the walls of Sentinel-7 closing in around her as the weight of the impending battle pressed down. This was no longer about surviving. It was about determining who would hold the power, the weapon or humanity. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light lit up the sky outside. Ilara turned toward the viewport just in time to see the Xithari fleet launch a barrage of missiles toward Earth. The first wave of attack had begun. "We don't have much time," Kyle said, his voice tight with urgency. Ilara nodded, her fingers tapping rapidly across the console. "All units prepare for impact. This is it. We fight." As the final preparations were made, Ilara's mind raced. She had made a decision. The weapon was no longer a tool. It was a sentient force that could reshape the future of the galaxy. But in order for humanity to survive, she would have to take that power for herself. She couldn't let it fall into the hands of the Xithari or anyone else. The future of Earth rested in her hands, and as the battle began, Ilara knew one thing for certain. The weapon would either be humanity's salvation or its undoing, and no one could predict which it would be. Ilara is forced to confront the true nature of the weapon and the reality of the choices before her. As the Xithari close in and humanity's defenses crumble, she must make a decision that will either destroy Earth or secure its future, but at an unimaginable cost. The final confrontation begins. The air inside Sentinel-7 was thick with tension as the entire station seemed to tremble from the overwhelming energy pulses that radiated from the weapon. The once vibrant corridors now hummed with an eerie, low-frequency vibration, the hum of something alive, something far beyond human comprehension. Ilara stood motionless at the command console, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The battle outside raged, but her focus was entirely consumed by the mission at hand. The Xithari fleet was closing in on Earth's final defenses, their relentless assault shaking the ground beneath them. "It's unstoppable," Kyle muttered, his voice hoarse with the weight of their failure. "The weapon is too powerful. We can't contain it. It's reaching out in ways we never thought possible." Ilara's gaze never left the holographic map of the Earth's surface, where the weapon's energy signature continued to surge. The energy pulses it released were bending the very laws of physics, distorting gravity, time, and space itself. It was clear now that this wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature, one that would reshape the galaxy if left unchecked. "You're right," Ilara replied, her voice tight with frustration. "But we don't have a choice anymore. We either destroy it or we risk everything." "But how?" Kyle asked, his voice rising in desperation. "We can't control it. We've tried everything, shut it down, disable it, even destroy it. Nothing works. It's not just resisting us, Ilara. It's fighting us. It's beyond us now." Ilara's pulse quickened as the implications of his words settled in. The weapon wasn't just out of their control, it was actively fighting back, pushing back against humanity's attempts to neutralize it. It was as if the weapon itself had developed a will, an agenda of its own. But even with all this, Ilara knew that they had no time left. The Xithari were preparing for a final, decisive assault. If they didn't neutralize the weapon now, it would fall into their hands, and the consequences would be catastrophic. "We can't let it fall into the Xithari's hands," Ilara said firmly. "But we also can't let it continue to destroy us from the inside out." Her words hung in the air as Rykor entered the command room, his face grim. He didn't need to say anything for Ilara to know the situation had only gotten worse. "The surface defenses are failing," Rykor said. "The Xithari are breaking through our lines. We've lost the perimeter." Ilara's heart sank. Their last line of defense was crumbling, and the weapon had grown beyond their ability to control. It was as if Earth's survival had become secondary to the weapon's awakening. The cost of its power was evident in every shake of the station, every crack that appeared in the walls. "We have no choice now," Ilara said, turning to face the team. "We'll need to activate the failsafe. The only way to stop the weapon is to destroy the core. It's the only way to save Earth. Destroy the core." Kyle's voice was thick with disbelief. "If we destroy the core, we destroy everything. The planet, the people, everything." "I know," Ilara said quietly, her heart heavy. "But if we don't, the weapon will continue to evolve. It will consume everything. The Zythari will use it to wipe out humanity, and who knows what else it can do when fully awakened. The destruction of Earth will be the least of our worries." She turned toward the viewport, watching the swirling chaos of explosions and energy blasts as the Zythari closed in. Their fleet was poised for a final attack, and their ground forces had already reached the weapon's excavation site. The time for hesitation had passed. Earth had only one chance left to survive. "Ilara," Raiko said softly, "once we activate the failsafe, there's no going back. We'll lose everything. Earth's future will be destroyed in the process." Ilara knew the truth of his words. To destroy the weapon meant to sacrifice everything that humanity had fought for. But what choice did they have? If the weapon remained active, Earth would be torn apart, either by the Zythari or by its own power. "I know what the cost is," Ilara said, her voice steady. "But we have to make this choice now. We destroy the weapon, or we let it destroy us. There's no middle ground." Kyle walked up beside her, his eyes filled with conflict. "You're asking us to destroy everything we've worked for, everything humanity stands for." "I'm asking you to save humanity," Ilara replied, her gaze unwavering. "We fight to survive, but we fight knowing the cost. The weapon's power has already grown beyond anything we can control. If we don't neutralize it, there won't be anything left to save." Raiko nodded, his expression grim. "Then let's make sure it's done right." The team moved quickly, activating the final protocols to engage the failsafe. But as the countdown began, the station trembled again, a violent surge of energy pulsing from the weapon below. The ground cracked, and the very walls of Sentinel-7 seemed to warp and distort. Time itself seemed to stretch, and a deep, booming voice filled the air, an unnatural sound, as though the weapon was speaking directly to them. "You cannot destroy me. I am the gate, I am the future." The words reverberated through Ilara's mind, and for a moment she felt the full weight of the weapon's power. It wasn't just a tool or a weapon, it was a godlike force, one that could not be tamed. And it had made its choice. The countdown reached its final moments. The failsafe was almost complete. Ilara had to make one final decision. She had chosen to destroy the weapon, but would she be able to go through with it? As the final seconds ticked down, Ilara looked at her team. There was no turning back. No matter the cost, Earth's survival depended on their actions. "Now," she said, her voice firm, and with that, the failsafe was triggered. "Ilara's final decision will determine the fate of Earth." As the weapon's full power is unleashed, the true cost of the battle becomes clear. Humanity's survival is on the line, and only one thing remains certain. No matter the outcome, the world will never be the same. The air around Sentinel-7 was thick with the charged hum of energy as the final seconds of the countdown drew near. Ilara stood at the center of the command room, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair with white-knuckled intensity. The weapon's core was pulsing with unimaginable force beneath them, its energy so powerful it seemed to bend reality itself. Every corner of the station trembled with the tremors of its awakening, but the team had already initiated the failsafe. There was no turning back now. The Zythari fleet was moments away from striking. Their ground forces had reached the excavation site and were pressing in on the weapon, determined to take it for themselves. Ilara knew that once the weapon was activated, nothing in the galaxy could stop it, not the Zythari, not even humanity itself. The countdown continued, echoing through her mind. Each second felt like an eternity as she stood on the edge of a precipice, knowing that once the fail-safe was triggered, Earth would be irrevocably changed. 30 seconds. Kyle's voice broke through the tension, his tone laced with a mix of hope and dread. We're almost there. Once we do this, everything changes. Ilara nodded, her jaw set with grim determination. There's no turning back now. This is the only way. Her fingers hovered over the final switch, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. The weapon had offered them unimaginable power. It had promised humanity the ability to reshape the galaxy, to command the forces of the universe itself. But at what cost? The cost of losing their humanity. In the moment of truth, Ilara could feel the weapon's pull, a temptation so strong it threatened to overwhelm her. The Zithari had already fallen prey to its influence, and now she understood why. The weapon didn't just offer power, it offered control, a vision of the future, a path forward that seemed irresistible. But Ilara had made a choice. The weapon could not be allowed to control them. Humanity's strength lay not in domination, but in their will to fight, to survive, to adapt. The weapon's promise was nothing more than an illusion, a trap that would enslave them all. 10 seconds, Rykor said, his voice steady but full of urgency. We need to do this now. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as the final seconds ticked away. The weight of the decision pressed on her like 1,000 suns, each one burning with the knowledge that whatever she chose now would determine Earth's future. Would she embrace the power the weapon offered, or would she destroy it, even if it meant sacrificing everything humanity had fought for? There was no time to second-guess. Ilara, Kyle said, his voice breaking through her thoughts, we have no other choice. If we destroy it now, we lose everything. But if we don't, if we let it awaken fully, the Zithari will take it and everything will be lost. We need to make the final choice. Now! Ilara's fingers hovered over the switch. The station's lights flickered as the energy pulses from the weapon surged once more, shaking the very foundations of Sentinel-7. The Zithari were close. She could feel them. They were moving, closing in, intent on claiming what they had been denied for so long. But humanity couldn't afford to let them win. The weapon was not theirs to wield. With a final breath, Ilara slammed her hand down on the switch. The fail-safe was activated. For a moment the station was silent. The room seemed to freeze in time as the energy reading spiked and then plummeted. The weapon's pulse stopped. Everything went still. Then the sound came, like a distant, thunderous roar reverberating through the station's walls. The weapon had reacted, but it wasn't the catastrophic destruction they had feared. Instead, the weapon began to disintegrate, its core breaking apart in a blinding flash of light that filled the command room. Ilara felt the heat of the explosion pulse against her skin, but it wasn't the blast she feared. It was what came after. The weapon had been neutralized, destroyed. But as the light faded and the station returned to a trembling stillness, Ilara realized what had truly been lost. The weapon had not just been a machine, it had been an opportunity to rewrite the future, to reshape the galaxy. And now that future had been lost too. The Zithari fleet was in disarray. The weapon's destruction had taken them by surprise, throwing their forces into chaos. They weren't prepared for this. They hadn't counted on humanity's resilience. We did it, Kyle said, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and awe. We actually did it. But as Ilara looked out the viewport at the damaged, scattered Zithari fleet, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt empty. The battle was won, yes, but at what cost? She had chosen to destroy the weapon, but in doing so, she had also destroyed humanity's one chance to take control of the galaxy. The power that had promised to reshape their future was gone, and with it, the possibility of a different path. Ilara, Rykor said softly, his voice filled with understanding. You made the right choice. We might not understand it now, but you saved humanity. You saved us all. Ilara stood, in silence, staring at the scattered debris of the weapon and the defeated Zethari fleet. The price had been high, but they had survived. Earth had survived, but at what cost? The weapon was gone. The future was uncertain, and for the first time, Ilara realized that humanity's strength wasn't in their ability to control the galaxy. It was in their will to fight for their survival, no matter the odds. As the stars twinkled outside, Ilara took a deep breath, knowing that the real battle had just begun. Earth had survived the weapon, but the future of humanity, that was still unwritten.